At the end of the day, what we wish the international community to do is to speak the truth. Um, when they see that this new law is not doing any good to Hong Kong, this international financial center, then they have to speak up. They have to tell Beijing. If they see that this new law is threatening the fundamental rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people, they have to say it. They have to tell Beijing. They have to tell Beijing that, look, this is not only about Hong Kong and Beijing's relationship, this is also about Hong Kong's reputation among the world. If the rest of the world stop investing in Hong Kong, if the rest of the world start calling their citizens back home, stop investing here, then what would be left to Hong Kong?
Just what exactly is at stake for Hong Kong with the new draft national security law, which was recently rubber-stamped by China's National People's Congress? Has Hong Kong lost its autonomy, as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently announced? And how is China's Communist Party expected to circumvent Hong Kong's legislature to ultimately enact the law? In this episode, we sit down with Hong Kong lawyer and Legislative Council member Alvin Yeung, who's also the leader of Hong Kong's pro-democracy Civic Party. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Alvin Yeung, so great to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Well, thank you, Yan. It's a pleasure.
Alvin, it's a very difficult time where we're talking with you at the NPC, China's rubber stamp, let's call it, legislature, just essentially passed the so-called national security law for Hong Kong, or a draft resolution for it. And, everyone's saying this means very, very difficult things. You are, in the heart of it in Hong Kong. You're a legislative council member. You're the head of one of the pro-democracy parties, the Civic Party. What does this legislation mean for Hong Kong and for you?
Well, in gist, to a lot of friends around the world who are watching this program, Hong Kong has been so successful as a trading center, financial center over the past 1.5 centuries. And there's one essential element to this success, and that is freedom. This so-called national security law is going to undercut, if not take away, this very important element, that is freedom. Let me explain a bit. So Hong Kong has its own mini constitution, the basic law that guarantees all the fundamental rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people, including freedom of expression, freedom of the press, etc. There's one article that is called Article 23 that requires Hong Kong government to have your own national security law that is applicable to Hong Kong only. Under one country, two systems, China has its own jurisdiction and Hong Kong has the common law jurisdiction. And so Article 23 makes it very clear it's the Hong Kong government's own responsibility to have your own set of rules. They have the first attempt in 2003, but back then a lot of Hong Kong people, over 500,000 of Hong Kong people took to the streets, and the legal sector said, hey, it's a bad law because it's unclear. People could fall into the traps. They could get themselves into trouble because of this unclear piece of legislation. And so at the end, we overthrow it, or the Hong Kong government withdrew that piece of legislation. And since then, no administration attempted to try to impose the same law on Hong Kong again. But when it comes to 2020, Beijing said, enough is enough. I'm not going to give you any chance to have your own set of rules. I'm going to impose on you. I'm going to impose my own set of national security law on you Hong Kong people. And the Hong Kong legislature is undercut. We got no say to that. Hong Kong people were not consulted. Nobody knew what's the details of the law. It's just a matter of order. Beijing imposes it on Hong Kong, and that's it. And so that is the impact on Hong Kong. As a place where we cherish freedom, as a place where everybody can enjoy our own set of freedom and partially democracy, I fear that by introducing or by imposing, in fact, this new set of rules on Hong Kong people, not only Hong Kong people will suffer, but also our international financial center status will also be undermined because of that.
So, is this the end of one country, two systems?
Well, to a lot of people, this is, if not the end, then this is the beginning of the end. Why? As I mentioned a bit earlier, this new law is threatening freedom of Hong Kong. This new law is also making Hong Kong people worried about their own conduct, whether that would fall into the categories of the restrictions imposed by this new law. Nobody knew whether in the future you would be charged or you'd be arrested by the national security agents sent from China, because this is what they said. They're going to set up a new national security agent in Hong Kong. Can you imagine that? Because they said the local police, they had no experience in enforcing national security law. So they have to import some sort of mainland agents to Hong Kong to do the job. If that logic goes, then of course they have to remove their local prosecutors and they have to take up the prosecution themselves. And in fact, earlier yesterday or the day before, there's a story that Beijing is planning to restrict judges, foreign judges in Hong Kong, to hear those cases because they cannot trust foreigners. And then, can you still call that Hong Kong if that happens to be the case? No, I mean, obviously, foreigners, international investors trust our system because this is a transparent system, because we understand judges could be impartial, because we know there are local judges as well as foreign judges who sit in the courts and they hear the case just the same way the other guys are doing. And if they try to remove foreign judges, how are we going to convince the rest of the world that things are still the same? So you see, this is why one country, two system is under strong threat, or in fact, you may just call it the end of it.
Right, and fundamentally what you're describing here is actually the end of rule of law.
That is true. We are not sure when this new legislation becomes law in Hong Kong, as I said, who will be enforcing it? Mainland agents, and then are they subject to local laws? What would happen if they breach any human rights protections? Is there any remedy to that? We do not know. How would the prosecutors going to do the cases? Would that be still the same standard beyond reasonable doubt? We do not know. What sort of evidence are they going to adduce? In Hong Kong, you have to obey to a certain sort of restrictions when it comes to adducing evidence. But what would this mainland agents do when it comes to in the name of national security? We do not know. And also trials when it comes to courts. If foreign judges cannot hear all these cases, what would happen? And again, Yan, we know when this pro-Beijing people, when those ministers, when these officials from Beijing try to convince Hong Kong and the rest of the world that, hey, this is no big deal, we're simply targeting a very limited group of people. Well, just look at China. There are a lot of cases that when they try to demand for transparency from their local government, when they try to go after the wrongdoers on food safety, when people are simply calling for political reform in a peaceful way, well, they all got arrested and thrown to jail. One of the most famous examples is the late Liu Xiaobo, and who passed away in jail. You see, this is something Hong Kong people are worried about, because we do not know whether we could still exercise our freedom of expression and criticize the state leadership or the local leadership. That's where the problem is.
So, I'm just thinking of this. I saw a clip of a recent CNN interview with let's say, pro-Beijing business side person, I forget the name right now, basically arguing that this is something that will actually kind of strengthen security in Hong Kong. So how does this other perspective fit into all this?
Yeah, sure. All right. Do you believe that?
Well,
I mean, let me try to state my case, my argument clearly. We all understand what had happened since last June. Last year, around this time, the Hong Kong government was trying to introduce and pass this highly controversial extradition bill that is fundamentally going to change the system of Hong Kong, that allows criminals sent to China for trial. And that has been restricted and prohibited since day one, since the handover. And Carrie Lam, the chief executive, tried to impose it and change the system fundamentally. And what did she mean? Well, millions of Hong Kong people took to the street peacefully, trying to stop her. The legislature, we had a fight inside Legislative Council, and so people blocking LegCo, trying to make sure that the bill would not be able to resume second reading, the legislative procedure. Eventually, Hong Kong people made it. But afterwards, when people protest again, they met by police brutality. And this government tried to turn a blind eye to that and simply stand with the police and said nothing's wrong. They point the fingers not only at the opposition members, not only at those people on the street, but also foreigners. They said there's foreign interference. But did you hear any single word from this government saying that, sorry, I was wrong, I make a mistake, I make a misjudgment, I failed Hong Kong people, so I'm going to correct my wrong, I learned a mistake? No. What they're trying to do right now is, after 1 year of unrest, after 1 year of chaos, they introduce another piece of legislation trying to fix the problems. And logically speaking, does it sound logical? It doesn't make sense at all, because they are not going to make it, because Hong Kong people are angry. And we can predictably foresee that there will be more unrest in the months to come.
So, Alvin, one thing that we realized, there is some kind of process where the national security law could be implemented bypassing the legislature entirely. Is that right?
That is exactly what Beijing is doing. Of course, I do not agree with that. That is completely to the contrary of the spirit of the Basic Law, and in fact, to the articles of the Basic Law. According to the Basic Law, only national defense and foreign affairs should be dealt with by Beijing, and they could impose laws related to these two areas and put it into the Basic Law. There is an example, the Garrison Law is one of them, but that doesn't really concern Hong Kong people, and that doesn't harm rights and freedoms. And when it comes to national laws, there's the national flag law, there's the national anthem law. They were put into the Basic Law Annex 3 by the National People's Congress. But then these two laws also have to go through local legislation. They have to be scrutinized by legislators in Hong Kong. And so when it comes to this national security law that is completely new to this practice, they not only bypassed the normal procedures, they bypass Hong Kong people, they bypass the local legislature. That is to say, people like me, we have no rights to scrutinize the bill. We have no rights to understand what's behind the bill. And officials from the government would not have the obligation or responsibility coming to LegCo and explain the details of the law, just like any other laws. And so this is extremely exceptional. And in fact, I would say this is a contrary to the regulations or the rules as set so clearly in the Basic Law.
Alvin, you had a tweet just earlier that I actually saw, and I pushed out forward, kind of explaining how much representation Hong Kong people actually have in the LegCo. I'm just wondering if you could break that down for me really quickly.
So Hong Kong, we have 7.5 million roughly population, and at the legislature we have 70 legislators. Although not all of them were directly elected by the people, but just leave that aside. And today, this groundbreaking, this extremely important piece of legislation will pass in the National People's Congress by 2,878 people. But these people, out of them, only 30 odd of them were coming from Hong Kong, and the rest of them are just any other mainland citizens or mainland representatives who might not have even been to Hong Kong before, who might have absolutely nothing to do with Hong Kong. But then this body of the National People's Congress passed a law that will fundamentally change Hong Kong's status. I mean, does it make sense to you? No, it doesn't make sense to me, at least.
Well, there was one dissenting voice, I noticed.
Yes, one and only one. And if we have no idea who that person is and whether that person is safe.
Well, so many kind of vantage points here at this point. We've been seeing, dramatically increased police activity, of course, in response to increased protests, this national anthem law that was protested recently. We're seeing, school kids in uniform being arrested, and actually you yourself have been working with some of these arrested protesters to try to help them, right? Get out of get out of incarceration or protect themselves, since you're a lawyer. What is the situation with that right now?
Since the introduction of this, or since the announcement of this national security law, we saw a number of protests on the streets on the past Sunday and also on Wednesday, Hong Kong time. Hundreds of Hong Kong people took to the streets. A lot of them were students, and even some of them were in uniform. These young men and women were fearless. They were brave, and they knew what's going on. They know what was going to meet them. There's police out there. They were sent to police station. They were questioned. They were detained for certain hours. But all these people, they understand what's going on, but they are still trying to do everything they can to save Hong Kong. They are trying to do everything they can to tell the rest of the world that they are not giving up, despite the fact that this is an uphill battle, despite the fact that Beijing might not listen. But then I understand from these young faces that they do not want to give up because they still call Hong Kong home and they want to do everything they can to protect this place.
Speaking of that, basically doing everything you can, so to speak, you were actually yourself, maybe not a week or week and a half ago, you were actually physically removed by security, I guess, from the Legislative Council room. I mean, that's something. It's hard to imagine, despite, things get very aggressive in the US Congress and in the Canadian Parliament, but you don't typically see stuff like that happening. Some people were commenting, hey, where was the Sergeant at Arms? And I was thinking, no, it was the Sergeant at Arms that was basically doing this. And then even today, we were trying to talk on the phone several times, but there was all this drama in the chamber. Can you tell us, I'm guessing this is part of what you're talking about, but what's going on here?
Well, in a nutshell, since last year, when lots of people talk to the streets, we legislators in council were trying to speak on behalf of the people. But due to the unfair system, although the Democratic camp legislators, we were the majority in terms of votes, but when it comes to the seats, we are still in minority. And so there were different procedures that we tried to use in order to try to slow down the legislative procedures. And one of them is filibustering. As people understand around the world, filibustering is nothing exceptional. It's just a normal piece of tool exercised by the legislators. But obviously, when those in power, the pro-Beijing legislators, they try to undercut our rights. They try to use their rules and stop filibustering. Of course, our colleagues were not happy. We were trying to protest against it. We were trying to voice out. We were trying to make sure that people understand what went wrong. But we were not met by our colleagues on the other side. We were met by the security guards, and these security guards were supposed to protect our safety. But obviously, we were removed by these security guards as instructed by pro-Beijing camp legislators.
But so, Alvin, how is it that the security can be used to, quell what is ostensibly legitimate democratic activity?
Well, unfortunately, this so-called security guards, they have taken their side. And when they simply took instructions from their bosses, who, of course, are in charge of the Legislative Council, then that's what happened.
I mean, fascinating and, obviously incredibly difficult situation you all find yourself in. Do you feel personally safe? I mean, even, I was talking with Emily Lau the other day, we were asking this question, this national security law, it certainly would endanger potentially me if I decided to come to Hong Kong. Obviously, it endangers anybody that's speaking up against it.
Well, there's nothing much we could fear about. Yeah, I mean, yes, I'll be extremely naive if I say I have no fear. I mean, I have my concerns too. But then I'm so proud to get the opportunity to serve Hong Kong people as their lawmaker. And I think I'm doing everything I could in the right way. I have done nothing wrong to Hong Kong, to my country. I'm just simply telling the truth. If you tell me that speaking the truth is a commission to crime, then of course there's nothing much I could do about it. If they have to do something on me, then just do it. I mean, what can I say, right?
Well, I think a lot of people are, watching very closely, and notably, again, it's been kind of a momentous last 24 hours, very significant. We have, the Secretary of State Pompeo coming out and basically saying, we don't believe, the State Department doesn't believe Hong Kong is autonomous anymore, and that's a first in history. What do you make of that?
Well, anybody in Hong Kong would say, even if the high degree of autonomy as promised by Beijing is still there, that is only a slogan. Nobody believes in that anymore because they undercut the legislature, they undercut all the structure here in Hong Kong, and it's very hard to believe that there's still a high degree of autonomy. And so Secretary Pompeo is basically just making a point that is shared by a lot of Hong Kong people here.
Got it. So what do you make of the international response? I mean, there's been kind of a range. And by the way, of course, let's remember back to late 2019, we do have the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act that was passed, near unanimously. Actually, we have another human rights related legislature focusing on the Uyghurs that was just passed again on this in the last 24 hours. What do you make of the international response right now to this situation?
Hong Kong people we have been fighting so hard since last June, and I'm sure a lot of us are extremely grateful to the fact that a lot of friends around the world are paying attention to us, so that we understand we are not alone in fighting this fight. We expect that in the days to come, when Hong Kong is under challenge again, when Hong Kong is facing these gigantic communist China imposing this evil law on us, we wish the rest of the world would stand with Hong Kong and speak up for us. Not only because a lot of countries have your strong interest in Hong Kong and strong investment in Hong Kong, not only there are lots of expats from different countries living in Hong Kong and even calling it home, but also the fact that Hong Kong has been a member of the free world for so long. And a lot of us here in Hong Kong share the same values that a lot of friends around the world are sharing and enjoying, in fact. When we are fighting this fight, I'm sure a lot of friends around the world can really sense that this is a fight that we are fighting together. And so I wish in the days to come, the rest of the world will stand with us, can speak up for us, so that we know Hong Kong is not an island.
So, speaking of islands, Taiwan, the President Tsai Ing-wen, she has announced that she's going to be opening the doors to Hong Kongers that would like to, basically come to Taiwan. I've seen, people arguing for legislature in other countries. We, of course, have the people that are BNO passport holders or potential BNO passport holders in, I think it's up to almost 3 million or something that could be. So there's this relationship with the UK. And then there's people predicting there will be a mass exodus, so to speak. What do you make of this situation? What do you suggest?
Well, since the announcement of this new legislation last week, people Google about it. That makes perfect sense. But equally popular was another phrase on Google in Hong Kong, that is immigration. The people are thinking about moving away from this place. I can't blame them because a lot of people are having strong concerns about their safety and the future, especially their kids. And it's entirely up to different countries whether if they truly stand with Hong Kong, if they truly trying to support Hong Kong people, then that means there should be some different measures, or there are different ways for Hong Kong people to try moving to their places. The Hong Kong people are extremely smart and resourceful. I'm sure Hong Kong people can be beneficial to different societies.
So, Alvin, I realize that part of this national security law is this, we expect is this foreign influence element. So I understand, there isn't, I don't want to put you in jeopardy here, right? Because I don't want anyone to be putting that on you. But, broadly speaking, do you have some sense of how the international community can best help?
At the end of the day, what we wish the international community to do is to speak the truth. When they see that this new law is not doing any good to Hong Kong, this international financial center, then they have to speak up. They have to tell Beijing. If they see that this new law is threatening the fundamental rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people, they have to say it. They have to tell Beijing. They have to tell Beijing that, look, this is not only about Hong Kong and Beijing's relationship, this is also about Hong Kong's reputation among the world. If the rest of the world stop investing in Hong Kong, if the rest of the world start calling their citizens back home, stop investing here, then what would be left to Hong Kong? It will not only harm Hong Kong, not only harm Hong Kong people, but also Beijing and, of course, different countries. So I wish different countries would stand up to tell Beijing the truth, because that is something that is lacking in Beijing, I'm afraid.
So, numerous people, including here at the Epoch Times, we've argued that Beijing is basically using this time of coronavirus when essentially most nations' focus is very, very, let's say, on their own internal realities, right? Because of the disasters in all sorts of ways that have manifested in these countries. So what do you make of this particular timing right now?
Obviously, the rest of the world is so busy with fighting against the corona. And when Beijing is having a relatively low time on that, when they have done their part in fighting the corona, when Hong Kong people are still restricted by social distancing laws, they introduced this so that they wish, by taking advantage of this busy moment, the international community would stay quiet. But obviously, they have forgotten that Hong Kong is not like any other ordinary city of China. The world is paying attention to Hong Kong. And so I'm grateful that friends around the world are paying concerns and attention to us.
So, Alvin, it's the middle of the night for you. I really appreciate you taking the interview. And I saw photos from what happened in the Legislative Council today. Obviously it was a very busy day for you, and so forth. Any final thoughts that you might have before we finish up?
I just want to say and repeat the same thing again. That is, Hong Kong people will not easily give up. In fact, I don't think anyone will say they will let go on that. And so, keep watching us. Keep sending your supports to us, because Hong Kong people need all the support from friends around the world. That is extremely important to us.
Well, Alvin, we at the Epoch Times, we promise we'll keep reporting, on everything we can. We will, make sure the Hong Kong people's voice is heard in the world. And, I wish you the best of luck and the best of success.
Thank you so much. Yeah.